Hello and welcome to our webinar. Today we will be talking about the impact of the coronavirus epidemic on Chinese businesses, as well as the response from the Chinese government to ease the financial pressure on F&B and hotel enterprises. We will also talk about some HR issues that you might encounter as a result of the epidemic situation and do our best to provide guidance through this difficult time. Speaking on tax and government relief measures is Jessie Lin. Jessie is head of Accounting and Tax Compliance Services Department at Integra Group and plays a key role in the department's planning and business development activities. She has over 17 years of experience in a variety of financial and tax sectors and has advised hundreds of foreign invested enterprises across China in various industries. Speaking on HR guidelines and cost-cutting strategies is Pierre Wang. Pierre is Managing Director of Integra Group and has over 20 years of experience in external auditing, financial advisory, and business consulting for foreign companies in China. He served in management positions as Head of Shanghai at TMF Group, formerly known as KCS, China Finance Director of CB Richard Ellis, as well as Senior Manager of KPMG Shanghai office. Taking a look at just January and February of this year, the coronavirus epidemic is expected to have cost the tourism industry about 900 billion yuan, and consumer spending on food and drink is likely to have fallen by about 420 billion yuan year over year. The Economist Intelligence Unit forecasts that the real GDP growth could be as low or even lower than 4.5% if the coronavirus is not contained in 2020. At the center of the Chinese government's economic response to the coronavirus epidemic are relief programs and a series of stimulus packages expected to prop up the economy and ensure labor markets and income stability. So with that in mind, let's welcome our first speaker, Jessie Lin.
Thanks for Violet's introduction, and welcome everyone joining our webinar today. This is Jessie Lin, and I will introduce the government relief and the subsidy. So, first of all, we will talk about the VAT part. According to the notice number 8 issued by the State Administration of Taxation in 2020, the life services, transportation, and the courier services are exempted from VAT and other surtaxes effective from 1st of January 2020. So following, we summarize the definition of the three industries. So you can see the sports, education, tourism, entertainment, catering, and accommodation services belong to the scope of life services. So here I want to give you an example for you to have a better understanding how to do the calculation of VAT exemption. Here I want to give you an example regarding the VAT exemption calculation. First of all, restaurant A, it's a small VAT taxpayer with the VAT rate is 3%. In February, the monthly income is 100,000 RMB. Then based on the 3% VAT rate, so the monthly VAT payable is 3,000. And according to the government subsidy policy, so the 3,000 VAT payable is exempted. Then the second example, restaurant B, it's a general VAT taxpayer with the rate 6%. And in February, the income is 100,000 RMB, and the company also received the import VAT invoice is 2,000 RMB. So the monthly VAT payable is 6,000 minus 2,000, and the 4,000 is the VAT payable for the restaurant B. But based on the government subsidy policy, so the 4,000 VAT is exempted. So currently, the end date of the VAT exemption period is to be announced at a later date, depending on the epidemic situation. Let's move on to the corporate income tax, the longest period of which an enterprise in difficulty industries affected by the coronavirus may carry forward a loss from 2020 has been increased from 5 years to 8 years. So this is only applicable to the loss of 2020. If the company have the loss for 2021, then it cannot be carried forward more than 5 years. The difficult industries include transportation, catering, and accommodation, and tourism. The State Administration of Taxation also announced the deadline of March tax filing has been extended to March 23rd. Next, we will talk about the donation. Enterprises or individuals who donate cash or items to respond to the epidemic through a public welfare social organization like Red Cross or the People's Governance can fully deduct the amount from their corporate income tax or personal income tax. Under current regulations, the limit to the deductible amount is 12% of the total revenue. The remaining part beyond the limitation can be carried forward in the next 3 years. The donations under the new policy, this limit has been increased to 100%. Then we move on to the social insurance part. So as you know, all of the company need to contribute the employer social insurance part to the governance. So the total percentage is about 27 to 29% based on the staff gross salary. So according to the government relief and subsidy policy, during the period of February to June 2020, all the companies in Hubei are exempted from paying the employer portion of pension, employment, and worker injury insurance premiums, these three insurance. And for all the company outside of Hubei province, so for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprise, these three insurance are exempted from the period from February to June 2020. Then for the larger companies, 50% of these three insurance can be exempted during the period from February to April 2020. Companies experience difficulties in production and operation due to the epidemic may apply for deferred payment of social insurance premiums of up to 6 months.
Yep.
The exemption of employer portion is about 16 to 18% of the staff gross salary. That means about 50% has been exempted. Then we move to the rent deduction part. Rent is also one of the main costs for all of the company. So the government also decided to reduce the rental cost for all the SMEs, help them to survive for the difficult times in this year. So according to the subsidy regulation for SMEs that rent real estate from state-owned enterprise that stop production and operations in accordance with government requirements or epidemic prevention regulations, and do not lay off employees, may apply for the exemption from rental for February. A 50% reduction in rental will be given for the month of February if the rent is for office purpose. For the companies, you rent the office through an individual landlord, which are not from the state-owned enterprise. We suggest you to have a good talk with your landlord and let them understand your current difficult situation and ask for any discount. Or you can ask for a deferred payment together. Okay, we move on to the next regarding the financing. Now the government try to make it easier for SMEs to obtain financing. Government authorities at the local and the municipal level have committed to increase credit for small and medium-sized enterprise loans, reducing financing costs, broadening direct financing channel, and optimizing financial guarantee services. The different financial institutions may have different procedures for the loans application, so we suggest you contact an accountant to determine your own individual situation. Next, we will do a comparison of some policies in Shanghai, Beijing, and Shenzhen. So first of all, the municipal HR and Social Security bureaus will refund of employer portion of unemployment insurance premiums. In Shanghai, they will refund 50% of last 12 months. In Beijing, the Bureau will refund 100% of last 6 months. And in Shenzhen, they are same as Shanghai, so will refund 50% of the last 12 months. Secondly, the micro, small, and medium-sized company with difficulty due to the epidemic situation can apply for the deferred tax payment. In Beijing and Shenzhen, the maximum length is 3 months. In Shanghai, the tax bureau didn't announce the length, but the company can contact with your tax bureau and apply for the deferred payment directly. Thirdly, Beijing announced social insurance premium subsidy. The company's average number of employees remained flat or increased by 20%. They can apply for 30% of the social insurance for 3 months. If the company's average number of employees increased by 20% or more, they can apply for 50% of social insurance for 3 months. Lastly, Shenzhen announced the exemption of real estate tax and the urban land use tax for 3 months for the enterprise in difficult industries. That's all for my part. Thanks for listening. If you have any question, please send to the box and we will answer at the end of webinar. Then I will pass it to Pierre Wang.
Okay, thank you, Jessie, for an update on the tax section. The next session, I'm going to talk about the HR policies and some of the measures taken by the government recently. For the next few slides, I'm going to summarize it in more like a Q&A format to introduce some of the measures that the government has introduced recently. The first one, people may be interested to know like what happened if the extended period has been over and yet some of the employees are not able to come back to work. Then what should you do? If you are not able to come back to work because of the epidemic situation in your hometown, then the company should really proactively communicate with the employee to make sure that the staff can be arranged properly working from home, either through internet, through WeChat, telephone, or some sort of online tools. If the employees are not allowed to work from home, like say they're like a waiter or waitress, then the employer should negotiate to staff to take some pay leaves or any unused paid holidays at first. Employees who utilize the pay leave should be paid on their regular salary. So unless they are not able to work from home, otherwise the employer is supposed to pay the staff on a normal salary. And the second one, like if the employee has utilized all the pay leaves and still not able to work, then what happened? According to the Ministry of Human Resources and Social Security, if the suspension exceeds one wage payment cycle and the company is not able to arrange employees to work, or the employees are unable to provide normal work to the company, then the living expenses shall be paid. Now, there are two terms that we should be understand a little bit about wage payment cycle. When we talk about wage payment cycle, it really means that the normal salary payment period. If you are a full-time employee, you're supposed to pay once a month. Some company, like a restaurant, may employ some part-time employees, so they could be paid half a month. So every month you pay twice of their salary. Then if they're not able to work from home or work at all, then living expenses shall be paid. So what does that mean? You're not supposed to pay the full salary to the employees, but there's a calculation of the living expenses. So the living expenses is based on the minimum wage, a percentage of the minimum wage of where the company is located. So if the employee is not able to work from home or to work at all, then there's a percentage of the minimum wage that's supposed to pay, and we call that living expenses. Let's say, take for example, for Shanghai, the living expense is actually 100% of the local minimum wage. For Guangdong, Shanxi, Zhejiang, Jiangsu, Henan, normally it's like not less than 80% of the local minimum wage. Shanxi is 75% of the local minimum wage, and Beijing, Chongqing, Liaoning, Shandong is not less than 70% of the local minimum wage. So first of all, we have to understand the minimum wage at the location where the company being registered. So for Shanghai, we take, for example, the minimum wage is around 2,480. So the living expense is 100%. So even though the worker is not working at all, the employer is supposed to pay 2,480 per month until the time the quarantine is over and the worker is able to come back to work. So for other cities, you have to apply a percentage, and that's the amount of the minimum living expenses that the employee is obligated to pay on a monthly basis. How should the salary be calculated during the period staff is being quarantined? Like what I just described, if the worker or the staff is able to work from home, then the regular salary should be paid. But if the employees is being contracted with the coronavirus and is not able to work, then we should pay the employee a sickness pay. And the sickness pay will be calculated based on the medical treatment period. The next slide, I'm going to explain how the medical treatment period is being calculated. But normally, the medical treatment period is given to the employee in the range of 3 months to 24 months. Okay, and that depends on the actual working years and the number of years this person is working within the same company. And one thing that you should be aware that if the employee is being sick, you cannot, as an employer, you cannot terminate the labor contract during the medical treatment period. Okay, this slide kind of summarizes what I just said. So let's say, for example, if the employee that's being affected by the virus has less than 10 years of working experience, and he is actually working in your company for less than 5 years, then the medical treatment period will be 3 months. For more than 5 years, it will be 6 months. So the number of months will be much higher if the number of working years is more, and if this person is working within the same company for more than 5 years. Okay, so and for this type of what we call a sickness pay, the range will be around 70% to 80% of the minimum wage of the province or city where the company is located. So that's similar to the living expenses that we have just mentioned. There will be a portion of the minimum wage that is applying depending on where the company is located. Number 5, what happens if an enterprise suffers from production or management difficulties due to the impact of the epidemic? So again, if the company is producing products and they are facing difficulties, the best way of addressing it is to adjust the wage or arrange the worker to work on different shifts, shortening the working hours, or trying to negotiate with the employees if they can take a lower income. Now, the caveat here is that we have to make sure that we have a proper communication channel. If the company has a labor union, then you should communicate this with the employee representative. If not, then at least you should write an email or put it in a letter format to make sure that everyone is aware the situation of the company. Also, some of the qualified enterprises could apply for job stabilization subsidies from your local government. But in order to apply for this job stabilization subsidy, the government requires the company should not be laying off anyone or reducing the number of workers to begin with. So I'll suggest that you, depending on where you locate, check with your local government to see whether you qualify to apply for the job stabilization subsidies. And some of the workers may be still worried about coming back to work even though the period of quarantine is over. So what should you do in this case? The employee is supposed to come back to work, but if they refuse to come back, then the employees could face some internal policy disciplinary actions, because according to the labor law, if there's nothing to prohibit or prevent this employee to come back to work due to sickness or any other government measures, they are supposed to come back to work. And if the employee refuses to work, the company can take disciplinary actions according to the labor laws and regulations. And what happened if the company is really not working well, and can the enterprise lay off staff during the epidemic period? The answer is yes, but of course you have to pay some severance packages. In accordance with the labor contract law, if the operation of company experiences severe difficulties and required to lay off 20 and more employees, or 10% of the total workforce, the company should inform the labor union or the entire staff about the situation 30 days in advance. So you are allowed to laying off staff if you're really facing difficulties, but more importantly, you have to inform everyone about the company's situation 30 days in advance. And if there's a labor union, again, the representative of the union should be notified first, and it is urged that the company should come up with a plan how to settle down with all the staff being laid off. And this plan should be voluntary, inform the local labor bureau about the laying off before anything should be taking place. And then the question will be, how should this laid off staff being compensated? Now, depending on the number of years the staff work in the same company, normally it's a 1 full month of salary if the economic compensation should be paid to this employee if they work for 1 complete year. And if someone work for less than 6 months, and if someone work more than 6 months but less than a year, you still have to compensate 1 full month as severance. And if the employee worked for less than 6 months, then the employer is supposed to pay for half a month of the salary. And the compensation is normally calculated as the previous 12 months average salary. So in other words, we're not talking about the normal salary that you pay on a monthly basis, but the previous 12 months salary on an average basis. So in an exception of the above situation, if the company lays off an employee without proper reason, it shall be regarded as an illegal termination of labor contract. And the compensation will be twice the standard of the economic compensation. So rather than paying just 1 month of salary as a compensation, if there's without a proper reason, not just because you are facing a financial difficulty, but you just don't want this employee to stay within your company, then you're supposed to be paying twice of the salary as the economic compensation. And you could be facing like a lawsuit if the employee feel that this is not fair for wrongful dismissal. Okay, this one is a recent announcement by the Department of Border Inspection and Management of the National Immigration Administration on March 1st that if any foreigner coming in China having their visa going to expire during this epidemic period, you don't have to worry because your visa will be granted an extension for up to 2 months. So let's say currently a lot of the flight, let's say from America, is not flying from China going back to the US. and your visa is going to expire or is expired, it will be automatically extended for 2 months. So during the extended period, there's no need to extend the visa, and the foreigner is permitted to stay in China legally or leave the country normally. Okay, the next session, I'm just going to share some strategy or tips on cost savings. Some of the tips for reducing costs. I've already mentioned before that if you have some idle staff who is not able to work, one thing that you can consider as an employer, consider to share your costs with other restaurant owners. Instead of just leaving the staff staying at home, they can be working elsewhere. Recently in the news that the staff from Seaway is willing to help out people, willing to help out in Hema during the epidemic period. But there's one thing that you should be aware of, and if you are considered to share some of your idle staff, make sure that you are not falling into the trap of doing a dispatching service, because most of the restaurant are only selling foods and services but not dispatching services. So make sure that if you're deciding to share the cost of your employee, that you are not making a profit. It really just sharing the cost of the staff. Otherwise, you might be penalized by the Business Bureau for doing work that is not within your business scope. Secondly, you may consider to renegotiating a new salary with your employee. You can negotiate for a lower wage, or if you want them to work for lesser hours, that can also be done. So following 1 month of the operation stoppage, the business may begin paying living costs that I just mentioned. Normally it's around 70% to 80% of the minimum wage. A third point that I want to mention is to conduct a cash flow analysis. Again, a lot of the restaurant right now is not able to open to resume operation. So the focus will be more on the cost cutting. So if you have a number of products on the menu, you may consider to look at it again to see whether there are some products that can be easily sellable on the internet, or kind of packaging as a meal, like a set lunch, set meal to sell on the internet. And also, if you have a number of administrative staff, that's a good time for you to look at it again to see whether there are room for you to reduce some of this administrative staff, or you may consider to also some of your back supporting function like accounting or payroll or tax works. We are actually the expert in this area, and you're more than welcome to come to talk to us in this area. Lastly, I think the restaurant owner can consider to strengthen the revenue through online selling through some of the delivery platform like Ele.me or Meituan. Like I mentioned in point 3, you can reconsider some of the products to be sold online instead in the restaurant. That can also to act as an increasing source of revenue for the restaurant during this epidemic period. And if you're really running out of sources to raise funds, take a look at your registered capital. A lot of the foreign companies, even they have a registered capital registered in their business license, but a lot of the time that they haven't done this at all. So look at your registered capital to see whether it's fully topped up. If not, then you can start injecting money from overseas. Make sure that you already have a capital bank account to begin with. Then you can start consider injecting some of the money from your overseas account. Alternatively, you can consider borrow the money from the legal representative of the company. So if you're a restaurant owner and you're also the legal representative of the company, then you are the person who might be able to help the restaurant by injecting funds for this time period. And in the worst case scenario, you can always consider to close the business or make it dormant. So it's better to stop losses than continue to operate if the situation is not going to turn around. Sometimes it would be best to just make a stop, pay all the staff, pay all the suppliers to make sure everything is getting done. And when the situation improves, you can always resume your operation at a later time if you wish to do so. So that's some of the cost-saving strategies or tips that I think as a restaurant owners that you can consider. But obviously, something that you have to consider is the ways to cut any redundant costs and finding ways to boost up the revenues. So I think during this epidemic period, everyone is not easy, but there are always ways to get your foot back in place if you really try hard to make sure that there's a steady or positive cash flow at the end. Okay, now this is the time for me to answer the question that you might have throughout the seminar.